Birds of a Feather by Whitney Angel. Chapter 3, Where Cooing Doves Mourn What They Had Before. Summary, in which Tim has a shadow. Tim had a new bird in his flock. Unlike his doves, who were all soft-feathered, smoothing coos, and puffed-up gentleness, his crows, who radiated the unhinged energy of gremlins hopped up on caffeine and bad intentions. This one was different. This one was a raven. A massive raven, easily the size of a small dog, sleek and shadow dark, with intelligent blue eyes, and a slightly hunched posture that made it seem like he was always planning 3 moves ahead of you. And honestly, he probably was. Tim wasn't new to strange animals. He lived in Gotham, after all. He once got bitten by a genetically modified raccoon with cybernetic limbs. But nothing in this highly chaotic, borderline mythical life had prepared him for a bird that not only mimicked human speech, but used it to talk back. The first time it happened, Tim had been neck-deep in casework. His desk was a disaster of open files, digital tables, surveillance stills, and half-drunk coffee cups. He was chasing leads on a suspected assassination. No fingerprints, no security footage, and no sound. The victim was a tenacious investigative reporter with a history of exposing police misconduct. The raven had been perched silently on the edge of his desk lamp for nearly half an hour, watching him work, like a tiny, judgmental gargoyle. Tim assumed the bird was drawn to the warmth of the light bulb or trying to decide if the keyboard was a good place for a nap. Then, just as Tim was rubbing his eyes over a mortuary report titled James Tuner, age 39, the bird tilted its head, looked down at the file, and cooked a single deliberate word. Pillow! Tim, accustomed to crows yelling things like snack or bastard at each other on a regular basis, didn't even blink at first. No, he mumbled, exhausted. The attackers didn't wear masks. Pillow on head, dumbass, the raven repeated, slower this time, more pointed. Then it leaned forward and tapped its beak twice on a line in the report with surgical precision. Tim blinked, stared, then reread. The section under the case of death. Low-velocity gunshot wound to the temple. Little to no external residue. Bruising consistent with soft compression fibers present. Fibers from a pillowcase. Holy! Tim sat up straight. Of course! He was smothered first. That's why it looks like a silencer. It is the same ammo as the others. Supple, soft, contact kills. Before the shots are fired, post-mortem, to disguise the real cause. He trailed off, mind racing. The raven croaked once, a noise that could only be described as smug, before vanishing. Not flying, not hopping, not even flapping, just gone. One blink, and he disappeared into the apartment like a glitch in the Matrix. Tim sat in stunned silence. That was the day he gave the raven a name. He almost called him friend, but Ghost won, which was saying something considering Tim already had 8 feathered maniacs living rent-free in his apartment. An aerial soap opera in constant motion. There were weekly betrayals, dramatic love triangles, snack-based turf wars, and what might have been a group therapy session on top of the fridge every other Thursday. But this one was different. Ghost wasn't just a bird. He was an experience. He was big enough to cause mild anxiety when he landed close to comfort, built like a final boss in an avian RPG, and carried the permanent expression of someone who absolutely knew what tax fraud was and had no ethical objections to it. He looked at people like he was mentally fitting them for a suit, and a casket. And yet he moved like a shadow, silent unless he chose to be heard. He appeared beside you like a trained assassin, like a ghost in a haunted house. You only knew he was there if he wanted you to. And unlike the rest of the flock, who had the attention spans of popcorn eels, unless they were on a mission, and the self-preservation instincts of unsupervised toddlers, Ghost was calm, quiet, unsettlingly intelligent. He was clearly playing the long game. Cass dropped by about a week into Ghost's spontaneous residency, teleporting in through the balcony door the way only she and feral raccoons seemed capable of. Apparently now Ghost too. As usual, the does cooed politely, the crows mobbed her with gleeful chaos, and Bot tried to steal her shoelaces. Then she noticed the newcomer perched ominously on the bookshelf, his silhouette sharp and severe, like a tiny Batman. Cass blinked from the couch, being smothered by Lady, surrounded by crime scene photos and coffee cups that had begun evolving into new life forms. Tim didn't even look up. His name's Ghost. Cass tilted her head. He's new. Yeah, found him haunting the sink. Refuses to leave. She approached, as effortlessly silent as always, and held out a hand for the raven to inspect. Ghost stared at her like she just offered him a mid-tier job interview at a company he already secretly owned. Cass raised an eyebrow. Ghost blinked slowly, unimpressed. She moved her hand a little closer. The raven let out a sound that could only be described as a scoff. Tim finally looked up. Ghost, come on. Let her pet you. Ghost paused, considered, then with a very sigh of a mother accepting his fate, shuffled forward and allowed exactly 3 seconds of petting before fluttering dramatically to the top of the fridge to sulk. Cass nodded once. He is eldritch. More than you think. Ghost sulking didn't last long after that. He flew down to the table where Tim and Cass were reviewing a case 20 minutes later, and then sassed them when they confused the copper residue with being bronze. That's when Tim realized something alarming. Ghost liked him. Like, specifically him. Because after that day, Ghost started following him around like a feathered shadow with a superiority complex, doing helpful things. Like the time Ghost pulled out the correct file from a stack of 10, placed it neatly in front of Tim, and then proceeded to aggressively shred the rest with his beak like a sentient paper shredder with opinions. Or the way he climbed on Tim's shoulder and yanked on his hoodie string whenever he brooded too long by the window, like he was one dramatic sigh away from launching a solo My Chemical Romance comeback tour. Or how he'd peck at the corners of crime reports Tim didn't like, then drag them across the desk, leaving behind a trail of tiny angry bird footprints, like a very judgmental monochromatic editor. It could have been cute if it hadn't been so utterly efficient. Tim wasn't sure if Ghost was helping him or separately managing him. And the worst part? It was working. He was more organized. Between Ghost managing, Madonna nursing, and Lady's judgment, he'd eaten real food twice this week. He hadn't descended into full Detective Gobbler mode since Tuesday. Tim eyed Ghost now, who was methodically arranging pens by color like a tiny goth librarian with undiagnosed OCD. I'm being haunted by a productivity ghost, he muttered. Ghost croaked once, hopped onto the keyboard, and typed out FEED, then pecked the power button and vanished into the apartment like a judgmental Roomba. Tim sighed. He had a new bird. God help him. Now there was one thing Tim hadn't mentioned so far. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he wasn't quite ready to deal with it. See, He had a strong, borderline absurd, almost illegal suspicion that Ghost wasn't actually a bird. Wait, hold up. Don't call Arkham just yet. Hear him out. It all started innocently enough. The day after Ghost arrived, Tim was doing what any exhausted vigilante does out there, patrol, dragging himself out of the suit with all the grace of a collapsing Scarecrow. There were dramatic sighs. There were bruises. It was a whole ritual. Now, normally the flock didn't care. Cece took it as a sign to try and preen his hair like a living loofah. Lady and Madonna inspected his bruises like overly concerned Victorian nurses. Brett would inevitably abscond with a sock or his boxes like a gremlin in a B-grade heist film. Little and Bastard, meanwhile, would crackle from the curtain rods, offering commentary like drunk sports announcers as Tim failed, half-naked, trying to retrieve his dignity. But Ghost took one look at him, specifically, at Tim peeling off his shirt, and bolted. Not a polite flap, not a casual glide, no. Ghost let out a strangled "Croc! Croc! Croc!" like Tim had personally insulted his bloodline, and launched himself out of the room with the urgency of someone being audited by the IRS and hunted by every ghost he'd ever sighted. He even stepped out of the door in his way out, like he was so desperate to run that he didn't quite have time to avoid it. That's when the first red flag timidly raised its hand. Because no other bird had ever been flustered by Tim's torso. Judgmental? Absolutely. Madonna had once tilted her head at his bruised six-pack and made a sound that was unmistakably a tisk. But flustered? No one. Not until a Ghost. Then came the food problem. Birdseeds? Absolutely not. Ghost rejected it, with the passion of a Victorian widow turning down a suitor beneath her station. Me might accept some macadamia or peeled off nuts, but God help him if Tim offered the standard canary seeds. Raw meat? Big fat nope. Gave it the side eye like it owed him money. But toast? Toast rye. Specifically, Ghost became a walking Hallmark card. Leftover grilled cheese? The Raven looked ready to sign a lease and start paying rent. One time, Tim offered him a bowl of plain rice, and Ghost melted into his hand like an overcooked marshmallow in feathered form. It was alarmingly human, which brought Tim to the issue of the bathroom, because, Ghost was obsessed with it. If Tim left the apartment for work at VE or out on patrol, there was a solid 75% chance that when he returned, Ghost had disappeared into the bathroom, closed the door behind him, and stayed there for hours. A bird, closing doors, using the bathroom, alone. Tim had stood there, pudding in shaken hand, staring at the closed door more times than he cared to admit, suddenly wondering if this was it, if this was the moment Gotham finally broke him. He'd even considered putting a camera in there, just to prove the theory, but three things stopped him. One, that felt like the opening sequence to a very uncomfortable true crime documentary. Two, Ghost would 100% notice and flip off the lens like an angry teenager caught sneaking in after curfew. Three, and Tim was being brutally honest with himself here, he wasn't sure he wanted to know, because it didn't stop there. At VE, his private security system had started glitching. Cameras would black out, rooms in his apartment would just vanish from the feed, only to reappear hours later like nothing had happened. No alerts, no power drop, no tampering. Just static, black as ink, silent as the grave. Naturally, Tim being Tim, he tried to check it. Motion sensors, backup cloud logs, physical inspections. He even swapped out the hallway cam for a high-res, low-light replacement with full spectrum sensitivity. Nothing. No errors, no anomalies, no intrusions, just darkness. And it kept happening, which made him suspicious, which in turn made him very suspicious of Ghost. Because what kind of bird understood how to disable security systems? Unless he wasn't a bird. And honestly, it wouldn't even crack Tim's top 10 weirdest theories. He dated people with secret identities, fought people who turned into smoke. Once had a week-long debate with a time traveler about the ethics of punching his own grandfather. Ghost being a shapeshifted person? That was just Tuesday in Gotham. A Monday in the current Teen Titans team, with a gruff back from the mission. Still, Tim hadn't said anything, not yet. He was just observing, collecting data, waiting, because if Ghost was what he suspected, well, they were going to have one hell of a conversation. That's what he was thinking that Friday night anyways. The wind had teeth, slicing between Gotham's skyscrapers like a scalpel through flesh. Red Robin moved across the top roofs with fluent precision, cape trailing behind him like a second shadow stitched with purpose. Sherlock, ever the loyal Crow Scout, soared in a white arc ahead, losing low warning calls whenever something moved more than 2 blocks out. Lady kept closer, circling every few buildings, before perching silently near Tim's shoulder, with a single disapproving coo. Bastard, of course, was already vibrating with chaotic energy, darting from ledge to ledge, like he'd guzzled a double shot of espresso and hadn't stopped spiraling since, which, honestly, wasn't far off. Keep it together, Tim muttered, just loud enough for the birds. Bastard responded with an indignant craw. Lady sighed at him, with matronly judgment. Right, Tim sighed. Professionalism. Scarecrow had escaped Arkham again, and with him came the usual dread. Not just because of the toxin, though that was always near the top of the list, but because of how fast things spiraled. Fear gas brought Gotham's worst instincts out to play. Mass hysteria in the financial district, commuters leaping from buses mid-route, 2 GCPD officers reportedly screaming that their arms had turned into snakes. You know, Friday things. Sherlock circled sharply over an abandoned warehouse, wings tucked in as he dropped low. Tim paused on the rooftop ledge, one hand on his grappling hook. "We've got something," he muttered into the comms. "Empty tonight. No backup. Solo run. Everyone had their own escapee to get to." Sherlock dipped again. Sharper this time. Target acquired. He moved fast, landing suddenly on the steel beam just below the skylight. His eyes swept the warehouse floor. There he was, Jonathan Crane, striding in tight circles, fear gas banister in hand, muttering like a street corner percher who had been given tenure. "Jonathan," Tim called from the shadows above, voice flat. "Have you ever considered a hobby that isn't chemically induced terror? I heard succulents are low maintenance." Kane froze mid-step, then turned slowly, sackcloth mask twitching as he looked up, half lit by the flickering overheads. "Ah, Red Robin," his voice rasped like parchment soaked in aesthetic. "Come to embrace your nightmares again? Or have you come to confess that you miss me?" Tim stepped out into view, dropping lightly to the warehouse floor, his boot staff extended with a snap. "I don't even miss my therapist," he said. "But if I had to pick a favorite psychosis, you'd still be bottom three." Kane laughed, dry and cracked, and wrong. The gas blaster rose. Tim's instinct screamed at him to fight. Tim moved first, staff slicing through the air. He smacked the barrel aside just as it hissed a cloud of toxin, the vapor curling away from the redirected shot. He pressed the advantage, jab to the ribs, spin to deflect a retaliating strike, sweep to Kane's leg. But Kane dropped low, coat flaring as he reached behind it and pulled. Crack! A hidden metal bat slammed into Tim's side. Pain exploded through his ribs. He staggered, breath knocked clean out, knee hitting concrete with a jolt. The world tilted sideways as Scarecrow advanced, step slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. The fear blaster rose again, inches from Tim's face. "Well," Scarecrow cooed, voice syrup thick with malice, "let's see what hides in the mind of the detective. Dead parents, buried friends, or maybe yourself?" Bastard shrieked from the rafters, wings flaring as he dove talons first, but he was too far. Not fast enough. Then the world screamed, not figuratively, not metaphorically. Something in it let loose a shriek that tore at the seams of reality like nails down the spine of the universe. An ear-splitting, soul-deep howl slammed into the warehouse like a shockwave, and with it came a blur of black, cutting through space like a comet launched by pure, unfiltered wrath. The gas blast that flew from Scarecrow's hands, spinning into the shadows, and then impact. Ghost, not flittering, not flapping, tore through the air with the wrath of a forgotten god. He collided with Kane, talons first, knocking him back several feet, sending them both tumbling into a snarling heap of limbs and feathers. But Ghost didn't stop. He screamed again, an impossible, inhuman screech that felt like it bent time and space inward, like hearing your own death echoed back through your bones. Then he bit a clear, vicious snap, ripping Scarecrow's mask off with a single jerking motion. "Get him, you angry mystical kite!" Tim winced from the floor, one arm clutching his ribs. Scarecrow thrashed beneath the assault, arms frailing wildly as Ghost shredded his dignity, feather by feather. Then Ghost's eyes lit cold, spectral blue, twin beams of eldritch fury. He opened his beak and howled again, unleashing another psychic banshee wail right into Kane's face. Scarecrow whimpered. Jonathan Crane, Gotham's Lord of Terror, was crying under a bird. Lady fluttered down to Tim's shoulder, with the smugness of someone who definitely called this. Bastard landed beside him and gave a slow, affirming nod, like, "Yeah, I taught him how to do that." Tim winced, reaching for his grapple, as Ghost finally backed off, ruffling his feathers like a pissed-off war god, and perched triumphantly on Kane's chest like he'd just personally conquered the concept of fear. Kane passed out, just fainted dead away. Tim blinked at the scene, tense, then muttered, "Okay, you're definitely not a bird." Ghost snorted, actually snorted, then as if a switch had been flipped. The bird, formerly known as a wrathful, shrieking banshee, let out a series of soft, baby quacks and waddled towards Tim like an injured Victorian damsel. He was limping, one wing dragged behind him, like he'd been mortally wounded, defending Tim's honor. Tim stared. "Oh no," he cooed, hand putting his grapple back, as Ghost hopped closer, with an exaggerated wince. "Did the big bad man hurt the baby?" Ghost paused, calculated, then flopped dramatically on his side, with a pained sigh, tucked his beak into his chest feathers, and then completely still in the most theatrical, "I'm dying, pay attention to me" pose Tim had ever seen. There was a long pause. Tim blinked, then broke. He laughed, full-bodied, pain in the ribs, gasping laughter. "You dramatic pigeon," he winced. "You violent theater kid. What even are you?" The Ghost gave a single quirky chirp of victory. Tim reached down, and miraculously, Ghost let him scoop him up. That alone raised suspicion. Ghost usually required either buttered toast or at least 3 compliments about his wingspan before consenting to physical affection. "Oh no," Tim muttered, cradling the surprisingly dense raven against his chest. What did the bad man hurt? Was it your poor fiddly wing? Your itty-bitty baby feet? Ghost responded with a soft, dignity-defying quack before tucking himself against Tim, nestling under his chin like a feathered eldritch cat with a grudge. Tim bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Okay, alright, let's see what the damage is. He tried something new, poking an arm on the ghost's body and gently flipping him belly up, like those people in parrot videos online. Ghost tensed, talons curling into the reinforced leather of Tim's glove. Then, after a beat, sagged dramatically, wings spreading slightly in what could only be described as a reluctant royal surrender. Then, with a slow theatrical flourish that deserved a Tony, Ghost lifted the leg he'd been limping on and extended it towards Tim. Claws deliberately pointed like a ballet dancer. Tim raised an eyebrow. This one? Are you absolutely sure it wasn't the other one? Ghost stared at him, unblinking, calculating. Then, with the deepest, slowest sense of betrayal and zero shame, he curled the first leg in and presented the other, as if to say, actually, yes, this one's worst. Give it kisses. Tim broke. Laughed so hard, his ribs screamed in protest, half doubling over while still holding Ghost, like an overcooked, vengeance-fueled chicken nugget. Bassett landed nearby and let out a sharp craw that sounded suspiciously judgmental. Lady perched, with a long, suffering sigh that radiated great. This one is also a weirdo. Tim wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, still breathless. Oh my God, you're such a manipulative little gremlin. How are you real? Ghost blinked, slow and unbothered, then nuzzled into Tim's arm with a smug little huff like he knew. Which, to be fair, he probably did. Tim barely had time to compose himself, still holding his rib, still cradling the world's most dramatic feathered liar, before the rest of the bats began descending into the warehouse, with the coordinated grace of a slightly judgy murder of overly dramatic leather birds. Ghost's eyes flickered up. He took one look at the approaching bat horde and let out a tiny huff, and launched himself skyward, silent as smoke, vanishing in a single fluid motion. Only the rush of disturbed air remained in its wake. Tim tracked the movement instinctively, gaze scanning until he spotted the familiar shape, perched high above, massive black wings splayed wide. He looked more gargoyle than bird, hunched on the steel beam with spectral pose, watching, waiting. His protector, his editor, his weird, maybe not a bird, ghost. Tim exhaled, then muttered just for himself, "Yeah, this isn't over." Madonna and Lady took this opportunity to crawl into his sides, head tucking into dark, silky feathers, like this was just a Tuesday night in the haunted opera house of bird hierarchy, and Ghost was a convenient big mafia guy hanging out with his girls. Cece and Dee Dee flocked from above, perched on rusted beams like feathered gargoyles, peering down at Tim with wide dove eyes that somehow radiated judgment and passive-aggressive gossip. Meanwhile, Tim's personal murder of Crow had framed across the warehouse like ominous, twitchy Christmas ornaments. Railing scaffolding, broken crates, each was claimed by a sharp-eyed sentinel that stared unblinkingly at the bat fam, like they were trying to calculate each one's net moral worth. Red Hood yanked off his helmet the moment Bassett dive-bombed him with a scream. "Okay, you win, tiny demon, no helmet!" Jason snapped, rubbing the back of his head like that would smooth his pride. "Why the hell are you birds so aggressive, Tim? I'm not the one that locked them in a cage." Tim offered a blameless shrug. "You startled Cece once. She threw bread at me." "She felt threatened." "She's the size of a shoe." And she has boundaries, Jason. Nightwing, who had clearly decided to ignore the low-key war going on, stepped forward with a grin, like this was a meet and greet at a zoo. Okay, but when do I get to pet the does? Lady hissed, like full body rattle. Feathers fluffed. I will ruin you, hissed. Dick stepped back slowly, hands instinctively going to casually braid his hair, in a nervous habit he had developed to keep his hands occupied. Eventually, Tim said dryly. Robin stood a piece apart, arms crossed, expression caught somewhere between skeptical judgment and the intense curiosity of a child watching an eclipse. He squinted upward at the high beams. Drake, he said. Who is the new bird? Tim didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered upward to him. Ghost still perched like an unholy ornament. Wings half furled, shaped too sharp and too still. His gaze was steady, ancient, focused wholly on the group below, like he was trying to decide who would be the most amusing to strike first. Jason turned to make another snarky comment, but froze mid-sentence. Holy! He took a full step back, arm lifting on instinct, helmet dangling forgotten in his hand. I didn't see that one. I swear to God, I did not notice it until just now. What the hell is wrong with it? Ghost blinked once. Slow, blue, wrong. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat of asphalt, or something that wasn't entirely tethered to this plane of existence. Jason's voice dropped. I feel like it's judging me. He blinked harder, and now I can't unsee it. It's like I'm staring into the void, and the void is staring back and thinking, you peaked in 2010. Cece let out a soft coo. It sounded like agreement. Tim just smiled. That too wide, too sharp, suspiciously pleased smile that meant he was absolutely not going to make this better. I don't know what you're talking about, he said smoothly, hands in his pockets, voice dripping with faux innocence. Ghost is just a little baby. That was when the silence broke. Not like a whisper, not like a sound, like glass. His little birdie. The voice didn't speak so much as resonate, a vibration that struck steel and bone alike, echoing off concrete, pulsing through the warehouse like a low-frequency weapon. It wasn't a human voice. It wasn't even a bird wail. It was ancient, hollow, thunderous, like something buried beneath bedrock trying to mimic human speech through rusted cathedral bells. It shocked the air with weight and intention. Every bed in the room flinched. Damien's hand went for a blade before he even realized it. Jason took a full step back, pale as drywall. Nope, I take it back. That thing's not a bird. That's not a pet. That's a curse with feathers. Replacement. That thing is going to eat your soul. Tim's grin stretched even further, inching past concerning, and straightening into someone tell Bruce I might be going rogue. Leaned back slightly, all smack nonchalance, and looked up at Ghost like the proudest parent of a paranormal apocalypse. What are you talking about? He said. He is my little baby. Ghost, still perched like a final boss, with his feathers enforced, flanking either side, fluffed up with visible pride. His feathers rippled like ink poured into water, and he let out a quirk, low, soft, pleased. It echoed too, the kind of echo that didn't obey physics. Somewhere behind Tim, Bastard, never the one to miss dramatic timing, fluttered by and dropped a single dead leaf on Red Hood's helmetless head. It hit with eerie precision. Jason didn't even react, just muttered, "That was probably symbolic." Lady cooed like a funeral rhythm. Madonna tucked her head back under her wing, like she'd seen this coming all along. Cece blinked with theatrical innocence, and Dee Dee whispered a long, slow hoo, like a gossiping owl. And Ghost? He settled in deeper, wings folding, glowing eyes unwavering, as the bats slowly recalibrated their entire understanding of what bird meant.